Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's the new Ghostbusters 2, brought to us by HAL Laboratory. The new Ghostbusters 2 was unfortunately released in Europe and Japan only. The US market did not see the game due to Activision having distribution rights for the Ghostbusters franchise on Nintendo products at the time. And while the game is called New Ghostbusters 2, it is still a telling of the Ghostbusters 2 movie storyline. And it is easily the best of the Ghostbusters games on the NES, and arguably the best Ghostbusters game of all time. So here we go with the new Ghostbusters 2 for the NES. After the awesome opening skit of seeing the movie theater screen and the Ghostbusters popping out of it chasing Slimer, we then press start and get to select not one, but two Ghostbusters. And not only are all the Ghostbusters included, you also have Lewis from the films as well being a selectable character. Egon is my favorite of the Ghostbusters, so I'm going to pick him, and I'm going to pick Ray to go along with him. Though all the Ghostbusters control and have the same stats, so it's really just preference of which ones you prefer. And as far as I know, this was the first game that actually included all the Ghostbusters in the game. The first level of the game takes place inside of the Courthouse. You control one Ghostbuster while the other one is controlled by the AI, and it usually works pretty well, though sometimes the AI will get stuck behind things. Your goal is to use your proton pack to freeze the different ghosts. Your partner will then run up, and you are able to trap the ghost and then put them into the ghost trap. You must clear a room of all the ghosts before an arrow will pop up telling you what direction you're supposed to go to into the next room. The game is relatively straightforward, with only a few times that you'll have to go back to a previous area, but the game always gives you an arrow so you know where to go. Every ghost in the game acts different, and there's a large amount of ghosts actually to battle throughout the game. You'll use your proton pack with the A button and then wait for your partner to get close and press B in order to actually trap them. Each ghost, of course, will have their own patterns and sometimes attacks that you'll have to figure out and be able to work around to getting close. It only takes a single grab of an enemy in order to defeat them, and that actually works the same for the bosses in the game as well. It only takes a single hit with the proton pack and then using the trap in order to defeat them. But that doesn't mean that the bosses are necessarily easy. Be very careful in this hallway of the Slimer ghost that fires out the tray at you, and then you'll be able to take him down and start taking out the other Slimers that appear in all of the different rooms. While the game may seem easy from this initial level, the game has one-hit death, and you only have a few lives, and then you have 3 continues in order to make it through the game. If the game ends up being too easy or too hard, there is an options menu at the beginning of the game. You can hold AB and then press start at the startup screen, and you'll be able to change the difficulty. There's surprisingly actually 4 difficulties in the game. After taking out one more of the Jogger ghost, we move up to the boss chamber for the first level of the game. Here we're going to have to battle the Scoleri brothers. There's a bunch of chairs moving around, just ignore them, you don't actually have to capture them. Our goal is actually at the top of the screen here. You'll notice the jar of slime sitting on the table before it shakes a little bit and the brothers bust free. Use your proton pack to trap one of the brothers. Usually I trap the one on the left first. He'll turn red, in which case then you'll be able to trap him. Then quickly turn around and blast the other one, wait for him to turn red and trap him, and you'll be able to complete the first stage of the game. Level number 2, we're going underground for the first time in the game. You'll notice, of course, there's kind of a whole miner setting here with a whole bunch of mine tracks and miners using their giant picks to try to hit you. They move pretty slowly though, so you should be able to hit them from a distance and then get your guy in there in order to trap them. In the next room, be careful of the jackhammer ghost. They move rather slowly, but if you stay near the entrance of the room, you may end up finding yourself getting hit. You don't have to actually capture the minecarts themselves, but you will have to capture the ghost inside the minecarts. It can be a little tricky because you'll notice the track that they're riding on, so just wait for the good opportunity in order to grab them. As soon as you hit him once, he'll be knocked out of the cart, and you'll be able to easily pick him up. One thing with the guys in the minecarts, thankfully if you're not on the tracks, you're not going to get hit by them, but also, I don't think they really move if they're off screen. This is unfortunately one of the limitations of the game itself, so if you're like waiting for them to come back around the track, you may have to go down to another part of the screen you're not currently on and see, oh, there they are, and finally be able to grab them. In the next room, be very careful, as there will be a minecart right near the beginning that's going to come towards you. Once you take the guy off of it, just continue heading through the room, take out another one of the minecarts, guys. Unfortunately, this is another case where we're going to have to chase him down a little bit before we're able to grab him. The next room is actually really easy. The track is over to the far right, and it's very short, so the guy never stops moving around. So he's easy to grab. There's 3 of the pickaxe miners, and then you move up to the next big room. I think the ghosts seemingly get a little bit faster, it feels like, as we get a little bit farther in. Also, instead of just the pickaxes, sometimes they'll have giant hammers, and you'll also see more of the jackhammer guys. Eventually, you will come to the big giant train itself. Entering inside the train, you're going to have a lot of floating things with inside, like heads and other stuff. These are very easy to grab. Just take your time slowly upwards and work your way through the train room by room. Sometimes they'll then spawn behind you. You just have to move back a little bit, grab a couple of them, and then continue moving through to the final room of the level. Now this is the boss room, but it's pretty much just a Slimer ghost at the top. Stay in the right corner to avoid his projectiles, but honestly, you can just immediately run up to him, hit him with the proton pack, and grab him. I just want to show, though, that how the boss kind of works for a second or so before grabbing him, but honestly, it's an extremely easy, if you could even call it, boss fight, as you're able to immediately grab him as soon as you enter the room. When he's defeated, the train disappears and we move on to level number 3, which happens to be the apartment building. Now this is the longest level in the game, at least I'm pretty sure it's the longest level, it feels like it. A lot of the initial enemies are the pink slime blobs that we're going to have to deal with. They're very slow and they appear in multiples, and sometimes you'll have 4 or 5 of them on screen, it seems like at one time, but they're usually easy just to immediately pick up and grab and continue moving forward. A little bit into the level, you're going to meet the flying pig-like creatures. They're just slime blobs with wings. Usually they hide in cracks of walls throughout the apartment building, and then they actually have a spear that they stick out of the wall to try to jab you with them. So be always cautious if you see one, because they're probably going to try to stab you with it. As soon as they stab, though, you can run in, hit them with the proton pack, and then quickly grab them. Unfortunately, a large portion of this level will have you tracking down the blob creatures, and they appear in every little nook and cranny while you're going from room to room. In the next room are the giant ogre enemies for the first time. These guys spin a big mace ball above their head and then throw it out. If you are very fast, you can grab them before they're able to even attack with the mace ball. Sometimes you may have to wait a second or so for them to throw it out, then get in close and actually grab them. In the next room, another new enemy is introduced. These are the ghost ninjas. They disappear and reappear. When they reappear, they're usually trying to hack you up with their ninja sword. So you have to be careful. If you see one in a room, be prepared that they may appear somewhere near you and could potentially run into you. So as soon as you see them appearing, be sure to quickly turn around or turn in their direction and try to grab them with that proton pack. In this hallway, though, you also have a lot of those flying slime-like ghosts, so try to take them out slowly while moving through the hall. Wait for them to attack with the spear before trying to then get in close with them. Unfortunately, you can't open this door here, usually. It sometimes glitches for some reason. I think only one door can be open at a time, animation-wise. I'm not sure, but either way, we can grab him through the crack in the wall, and then move on to the next room, which has a couple more of the ogres. Here, for the first time, you'll see them swinging their giant mace. You can attack them from the side as well if you're able to get up to the side of them, because it's a great spot, because they don't throw the mace out to the left or right of them, only in front of them, so they're usually pretty easy to grab. Another version of the Ninja Ghost is the Throwing Star Ninja Ghost, which, when they appear, they throw out a series of shurikens just a little bit away from them. They don't, thankfully, throw them all the way across the screen, but you'll have to be careful because when they appear, they're going to start throwing them. So you want to either grab them as soon as they appear or wait for them to stop throwing them and then try to run in quickly and grab them before they're able to disappear again. The Pumpkin Ghosts are a little bit sporadic with their movement, but they're nothing we haven't dealt with like the miners we saw in the previous level. Up here to the top portion, there's some more of the ogre enemies. Take out one, and then move to the side of the other one in order to grab him. In the next room, there's a whole bunch of the flying versions of those pink slime creatures. Just like with the minecarts, if they go off screen, unfortunately they stop moving, so you may have to track them down sometimes, but overall they're pretty easy to deal with. In the next room, as soon as you get to the next door, you'll have some more of the flying guys here. Also some random slimes, but of course they're really of no threat. The flying guys, of course, are the hardest ones sometimes to, like, kind of get down, especially when you get a bunch of them in one area like this. But the way they move and how big they are, they're usually pretty easy to nab using the proton pack. Anytime you see a big room like this, you're going to be expecting those ogres, and that's exactly what you get here. There's one on the left side near the bottom to start. Hit him first, then take out the pumpkin guy and move to the top of the screen in order to attack the other ogre from the right side. The flying pink blobs that go around and actually come towards you actually fly in pretty much a pattern. You'll notice that they kind of move in a square-like pattern when they end up spawning, so because of this, you'll know where you can pretty much stand and be able to take them out without having to worry about them running directly into you. In the next room, you'll notice, of course, it's immediately another one of those narrow hallways, so expect the flying guys to appear trying to poke at you with those spears again. In this room, we'll have to battle 3 of the ogres. There's a little bit of stuff on the ground, so it's harder to get to the side of them, so sometimes you may just have to wait for the mace to come out and then run in close in order to actually take them out. The jack-o'-lantern guys are in full force in the next room. They hide out in actually near the rooms themselves, so you can kind of get a good jump on them to get in and be able to grab them. Since they move around sporadically and don't really come directly towards you, that's what ends up making them a rather simple enemy. Like I mentioned, this level seems to go on. It's probably the only level I feel like in the game that really drags, just because of how long it ends up being, and it feels like a lot of the rooms are very similar to one another. It doesn't stop the fun factor of actually playing the game, as it really becomes addictive of how quickly you'll be able to grab the ghosts and capture them in your traps. Thankfully though, this is the end of the level. As you run up straight to the next room, you'll get a cutscene, and there's no actual boss for this stage. Yep, you get to see the cutscene of the baby being taken away, just like it does in the movie, which is actually really cool that they include that, but it also would have been fun to have some kind of boss at the end of that really long apartment level. Now next up, you're back in the sewers, and now you're in the full-blown river of slime. And the slime is so thick on the ground, of course, when you're moving through it, it's hard to actually walk through as there's currents of it. So you'll have to battle a lot of the enemies here while also dealing with that. The Slimer-like ghost enemies will end up throwing projectiles at you in this level, and unlike some of the other projectiles we've dealt with from other enemies, these actually fly the entire length of the room until they end up running into a solid surface. So because of this, they are a lot more tricky to deal with than some of the other enemies. You'll also have these little creatures that are just moving slowly through the slimes, every so often popping out of the slime like a volcano to spew projectiles around as well. The biggest threat to you, though, in the stage itself, though, is the slime. Because of that slower movement, it can be harder to get out of the way of enemy projectiles, or even the enemies themselves, especially in bigger rooms where the enemies like these can float above the slime, so they can move around quickly, but then you're stuck trudging along slowly, so if they throw a projectile, you have to be really quick and think and decide which direction you should move in order to try to do your best to avoid those projectiles. This is one of the levels that you're going to have to do some backtracking, but it's really not much, and every time you go back, you're fighting another group of enemies. For example, like here, we went to the one room, now we have to go back to this one, battle the enemies along the river, and go through now the upper left door. This room has a really big open slime river to deal with. If you're in the current area, it's of course a lot harder to move, but if you stay out in the more center open area, it'll be a lot easier to deal with the volcano-like slime creatures that end up popping out. There's a lot of them here, as you can see, so take them out one by one, and every time you do, a new one will spawn until eventually they are all gone, and you can continue on to the second half of the room and walk your way through to the next room. Kind of surprised me they didn't include some extra monsters in that second half of that room. Now here, you'll have to deal with some Slimer-like creatures that are in the cracks of the walls, throwing over the walls a bunch of projectiles, which you'll have to dodge while trying to trudge through the slime itself. This is a little bit difficult. And then you have the weird spinning totem pole-like slime creatures that end up spinning all around and trying to chase you down while you're dealing with this room. In the next room, you'll make a few steps in, and the volcano-like creatures, as well as one of those spinning guys, appears right near the door, so be very careful when you first enter, because they kind of like spawn in right where you're probably going to be walking. After taking out the two at the top, you'll work to the bottom and take out the next couple of guys, and then take out these couple of spinning guys down here in the lower right corner before heading up and taking out that final volcano, while also having to deal with the slime pushing you. In the next room, you do have a walkway to the right that you can use to help you kind of move a little bit more quickly, but mostly what you're dealing with, at least at first, is a few of those spinning totem guys. After they're taken care of, one of the Slimers that throw projectiles spawns, so be careful that when he does appear, that you're out of the way of one of his projectiles. When you head upwards, there's going to be another one of those guys, so right here in this little entranceway, as you saw, he was able to throw one, and I was able to duck behind the wall for cover. The current here is going to push you upwards, so hit the totem guy while heading up and go through the next door, and you're in the boss chamber for this level. Now, what you have to do here is take out a bunch of these slime monsters that appear. You have to use your proton beam for a long period of time on one of these creatures before you're able to capture them. When they're up in the air, they kind of hover for a second before spitting out a trail of fire in front of them. If you're able to get one in the proton beam, they're unable to fire that fire trail. However, another one may spawn right near you, may pop out, and be able to spit that fire at you. As the battle continues onward, there will be more that end up appearing that you'll have to deal with as well. Unlike most of the bosses in the game, these guys don't have to be captured to be defeated. Well, most of them don't. Only the final one you have to hit with the proton pack. It'll then change color, and you'll be able to trap it in the trap and move on to the next stage. The next level is the final full-blown level of the game, and that is, of course, the museum. Introduced back here is a newer version of the flying slime creatures. These ones, as you can see, are a lighter color, and they're also a lot quicker. And obviously, with them being a lot quicker, they are a lot harder to deal with, so you'll always have to be cautious, especially when multiple of them are on screen at once. If you're trapping one of them, and another one sneaks up and tries to run into you from the side or above or below it. The next room, you'll have to save a citizen from a giant creature that ends up spinning in a circle and launches other creatures all around. After defeating and trapping the creatures, the citizen will thank you and you'll be able to move on to the next room where you'll be greeted by more of the flying guys. If you're able to do so, you may be able to trap them as soon as they end up spawning in. And there's a bunch of them in the room. As you can see, when I trap one, another one immediately spawns until I'm able to trap them all. Sometimes, of course, ones will spawn at other parts of the screen, so you may have to do some backtracking to the bottom portion of the stage in order to actually capture some of the ghosts. In the next room, a few steps in, some Slimer ghosts will appear. These are a new version of the Slimer-esque monsters. These ones are tan in color, and they're a lot quicker than the ones we dealt with in just the previous level. And they also throw the projectiles, so not only are they faster, but they also have those long-range projectiles that you're going to have to watch out for. Also here are those totem guys, which the version in this level are just faster versions of the ones we dealt with in the previous level as well. The really hard part, though, about any of this is because the areas, while they seem relatively open, there's so much stuff in your way, it can be sometimes hard to dodge out of the way. With the increased speed of the monsters, this level will definitely give you a run for your money, especially if you decide to ramp up the difficulty a little bit. As you can see, when trying just to maneuver around things, you end up running into almost every little nook and cranny. In the next room, you're going to see a slime jar that will magically appear, and then you'll have to do a rematch against the Scoleri brothers. Take out the fat one first, because he's the harder of the ones to deal with, and then take out the taller, skinnier brother. Other than that, the fight is the exact same as it was as the first boss of the game. Next up, you'll have the jack-o'-lantern pumpkin-like ghost guys. These are just, once again, faster versions of the ones we've been dealing with in previous levels. In the next room, it's a little bit more of the same. It's just a smaller, more contained area. It only has 2 ghosts. I'm really not sure why this room even really kind of exists. It's kind of a not that important room. But in the next one, you're going to have some paintings on the walls that will spew out like a snake-like creature that you'll have to grab. We had one of these guys similar earlier in the game, of course this one being faster. But then, also we have the chainsaw ghost. They can go invisible, and then they will charge forward once they appear with their chainsaw and run across the screen. Thankfully, you should be able to see them from a distance, so you can wait for them to spawn in and then get in and grab them with that proton pack. The jogger enemy from the first level is back here again, and this is once again a faster version of him. It's pretty much every creature in the entire game, I think, just about makes an appearance during the course of this final level, just their faster versions of them. In the next room, you'll have the trolls. These guys are the same color as the older ones, but I think they also, too, are faster than the original versions of them. Either way, though, you can easily get between them, hit the one on the left or right, and then hit the other one, and quickly get out of that room. Next up, some blobs appear, and these are pretty simple enemies, of course, like always. They don't move really quickly, even with their increased speed, and you should be able to easily pick them up. Be careful in this area here, because you have to get close quarters with a lot of the Slimer-esque ghosts, and because they can throw a projectile out at any time, be very cautious when you're deciding to move in and go after them. They're going to be able to have a lot more area to throw the projectiles out at you than you're going to be able to maneuver around the different obstacles.
In the next room, it's a smaller, more contained room, and there's a lot of little mini slimes. Just be careful that one of them don't end up spawning in directly where you're standing, of course, because it'll immediately hit you, because you only have a brief window when it starts to spawn in before it ends up becoming solid and actually able to do damage to you. Next up, you'll have the floating mask enemies that we saw on the train at the end of level number 2. Next up, there's actually no ghost in the final room before the boss. It's just a very long room for you to walk in, and then it's time to battle the boss for the stage. The second to last boss of the game ends up being a giant version of Dr. Yanish, who ends up splitting himself into 3. Now, you can attack any of the 3, but what I like to do is attack the one at the very top. Hit it with the proton pack, and while holding down the proton pack, maneuver around. Now, you don't have completely free range, you can only move so far away from them, but as long as you're holding on to this, you should have enough space to be able to easily move up and down, watching out for the projectiles of the other 2 clones. Overall, this ends up being a relatively easy battle, especially for how late in the game this ends up being. Eventually, after defeating enough of these clones, you'll be able to just suck up the last couple of ones, and once you're down to only 2, and then one of them, obviously it's a lot easier to deal with them. But this is probably the best strategy for having to deal with these guys. As you can see, eventually we are down to only 2 of them left, in which case then I'll attack the one here on the left, and then finally go over to the one on the right, finish him off, and move on to the final boss of the game. Of course, the final boss of the game is Vigo, and to deal with him, he'll pop out of the painting. Once he does so, he'll then fire out projectiles all around him that will circle around him. Immediately start hitting him with the proton pack, and you'll see he'll start flashing. Your goal is to avoid the projectiles. Of course, he has spinning around him. In fact, you can actually get the proton pack in a lot of times and hit him even while he's circling the projectiles around him. If you stand where I do, right to the right of his right foot, you're able to just move up and down and just slightly to the left. You're going to stay right here, and what you'll notice is I move down just a little bit to avoid the one projectiles, and sometimes I have to move a little bit left or right for the second set of projectiles. Of course, you're not going to really focus on him at all, just focus your eyes only on the projectiles, because they're going to come at you sometimes different ways, and because of this you have to be prepared to make sure that you're ready to make whatever little movements that you're going to need to out of the way of them in order to, of course, dodge. Doesn't take long though before he's defeated and flies back into the painting, and you can sit back and enjoy the ending to the new Ghostbusters 2. So as the credits are nearing their end, there's no real ending, but I do like the whole credit sequence of seeing the different creatures and the Ghostbusters interacting with them on the movie screen. The new Ghostbusters 2 is the best of the NES Ghostbusters games by far. A lot better than the Activision ones that many of us, of course, grew up with. And unfortunately, due to the licensing, of course, we never got to see them on the North American NES, just Europe and Japan. They were obviously a lot luckier than us when it came to Ghostbusters. While we didn't see it on the NES, there was a Game Boy version of Ghostbusters 2 done by HAL, which is done in the same way that this game was done. It's a little bit different. It actually features some different cutscenes and some little bit of changes as far as like layouts and all. So if you enjoy this style of gameplay but would like to play one that actually came here to North America, you can check out the Game Boy version. It's also a really cool game. Then we see the end screen, and the Ghostbusters walk off after Lewis kind of face plants before he too also runs off, and we get to see our final score and the end on screen. But with that, that's going to wrap up this episode of Play It Through. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider giving it a thumbs up or commenting down below. Those things actually do help the video get seen by more people. If you enjoyed this playthrough, you may want to check out my Sega Genesis Ghostbusters run that I did last year. It's a really cool game and easily my favorite of the Ghostbusters games I had growing up. I also want to say that the Play It Through Cornshaq shirt, the first ever Play It Through Cornshaq shirt, is available. You can get it right now. You can click the link down below. We got these through Teespring. We just finished the first campaign of the shirts a few weeks ago. I just got them in the mail this week, and we're relaunching the campaign. So you can check out all the information for the shirt right down below if you would like to add this awesome, really awesome black box inspired NES style Cornshaq Play It Through t-shirt to your wardrobe today. And of course, I also want to thank all the members of my Patreon. Without their support, their monthly pledges, I wouldn't be able to keep doing what I'm doing. And you can help out the channel as well by either purchasing a t-shirt, or you can click the Patreon button down below. As little of a pledge of $1 a month and keep this channel going. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.